Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Thank you. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Narayanam Namaskritya Naram Chaiva Narottamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayamudirayet Nashta Praeshu Bhadreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavati Uttama Shloke Bhaktir Bhavati Naishtiki. Prabhu?
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Narayanam Namaskritya Naram Chaiva Narottamam Devim Saraswati Vyasam Tato Nasta Praeshu Bhadreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavati Uttama Shloke Bhaktir Bhavati Naishtaki. Reading today from the Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 11, Chapter 3, text number 24. Entitled Liberation from the Illusory Energy. So we'll chant the verse. Shocham tapastitiksham cha Monam svajayam arjavam Brahmacharyam ahimsam cha Samatvam dvandvasam gayo Shocham tapastitiksham cha Monam svajayam arjavam Brahmacharyam ahimsam cha samadvam dvandva samjayo shocham tapasitiksham cha Monam svadhyayam arjavam Brahmacharyam ahimsam cha samadvam dvandva sanjayo Margie. Shocham, cleanliness, tapaha, austerity, titiksham, tolerance, cha, and monam, silence, svadhyayam, study of the Vedas, arjavam, simplicity, brahmacharyam, celibacy, ahimsam, non-violence, cha, and samadvam, equanimity, dvandva samgayo, in situations perceived in terms of duality. So read the translation by the disciples of His Divine Grace, Srila Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada ki. To serve the spiritual master, the disciple should learn cleanliness, austerity, tolerance, silence, study of Vedic knowledge, simplicity, celibacy, nonviolence, and equanimity in the material duality such as heat and cold, happiness and distress. Please repeat. To serve the spiritual master, the disciple should learn cleanliness, austerity, tolerance, silence, study of Vedic knowledge, simplicity, celibacy, nonviolence, and equanimity in the face of material dualities, such as heat and cold, happiness and distress. So, purport by the disciples of Prabhupada. Shocham, or cleanliness, refers to both internal and external purity. One should remain externally clean by bathing with soap and water at least once, and if possible 3 times daily. One is considered internally pure when he is free from the pollution of false pride and egotism. So Srila Prabhupada, he used the phrase revolutionary clean for Krishna consciousness. Prabhupada came in the time of the hippies. The hippies wore long hair. They ate anything. They engaged in illicit sex. They didn't always bathe so regularly. So they weren't known for their cleanliness. But Prabhupada turned the hippies into the happies by Krishna conscious training. So Prabhupada taught them to be externally clean and internally clean. Naturally, we know that the holy name is, as Lord Chaitanya said, Chaito Darpana Marjanam. The holy name cleans the mirror of the mind or consciousness from all the impurities from lifetimes of material entanglement. So Prabhupada, his main cleaning agent was the holy name. There's a statement, Apavitra pavito va sarvanvastan gatopi va yasmaret pundaritak sham sabhyabhyantara shuchi. That sabhyabhyantara shuchi, we become purified shuchi by remembering the lotus-eyed Lord. So, the way in the Kali Yuga, the easiest way to remember the Lord and purify our consciousness is through the chanting of His holy names. Haranam, 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 Eva Kevalam, Kalanasti, Kalanasti, Evanasti, Eva Gatir Anyata. So Prabhupada came with the supreme cleansing agent of the holy name, and he had absolute faith in the power of the holy name to purify everyone. So he gave it to the hippies, to whoever was open to chant the holy name. And Prabhupada taught that devotees should get up early in the morning and bathe, even though many of the early temples didn't have good shower facilities. Some temples, devotees would have like 3 minutes to shower because there was 30 devotees and 1 or 2 showers. So the devotees would always have to bathe before they came to the temple. And of course, Prabhupada taught the deity worship, which requires two main qualities. Who knows what those 2 qualities are? Yes, cleanliness and punctuality. Cleanliness came first. So the deity worship helps the devotee one of the main contaminations is the bodily identification. We've seen our body in the mirror hundreds and thousands of times. We identify with the body. So through the chanting of the holy name, we're purifying our heart, and through the deity worship, we're cleansing our own bodily contamination by being purified by the bodily form of the Lord, Satchit Ananda Vigraha. By worshipping the deity, we become purified. So when I first went to the LA temple, I attended some programs, and then I went for prasadam. In those days, at some temples, the devotees would have their breakfast on wax paper. Like they didn't even use plates. So you sit on the hard floor, and they tear off a piece of wax paper for you. Come and serve the prasadam. And although this was not so much culturally accepted, I saw one article somewhere, about the Hare Krishnas, and they said that the temple was so clean that they praised the cleanliness of the temple. They said the floor was so clean in the kitchen that they could put down wax paper, and they were just impressed by the cleanliness of the temple, even though there was a very odd custom in America to eat on wax paper, which many sophisticated materialists would thumb their noses at. But the devotees kept the temple so clean that the floor would be clean, then they would eat on the wax paper, they'd come and clean the floor again. And so Prabhupada used the phrase revolutionary clean to refer to the atmosphere of the temples that he created. So I'll read the next section. Tapa, or austerity, means that despite the irrational impulses of the mind, one should remain fixed in executing his proper duty in life. Specifically, one must control burning anger and the urge for wanton sex life. If a human being does not control the impulses of lust, anger, and greed, he loses his power to understand his actual situation. Human life is a golden opportunity to solve the overwhelming problems of life: death, old age, and disease. I wanted to also mention that many yoga processes are aimed at purification and cleansing the consciousness. But in the Bhagavatam, in the 10th canto, there's a verse, Ye ne ravindaksha vimuktamanina arun trayi asta bhavat avishuddha buddhaya. So it talks about avishuddha buddhaya means impure intelligence. Avishuddha, shuddha means pure or clean. So even though some very advanced transcendentalists aspire to purify their consciousness and attain Brahman realization, that verse goes on to say that Aruya Krishchena Param Padam Tataha Patanti Adha. Aruya Krishchena means they engage in, Krishchena means difficult or very austere practices. But even though they do these austere practices, they're not ultimately purified. So, patanti adha, they have to come back again into the material world eventually. So, even these impersonalists, if they're Mayavadis, then they are described as avishuddha buddhaya. They have impure intelligence. Now there are transcendentalists that are not Mayavadis who are in a neutral position, like the four Kumaras. They were in Brahman consciousness, but they didn't have a Mayavadi conception. But they were approaching the Absolute Truth firstly from the angle of the Brahman realization. So they were described as Brahmavadis. So when they came in contact with devotees, they were innocent, and they smelled the tulsi and other things associated with Krishna, the Supreme Lord, and they were attracted, and they became great devotees. So there's a difference between Brahmavadis and Mayavadis. Mayavadis, they've made some philosophical concoction that they're God, and that's a big problem. It's a contamination. Like someone says, I'm the President of the United States. If you go around thinking you're the President of the United States and you're not, that's a problem. That's a contamination. It's a fault. So I wanted to mention to welcome Bhakta Avatar. He's a disciple of His Holiness Lokanath Maharaj. He's a very senior devotee. And anyone that's been in Iskcon for some time have seen him in kirtans. Although his body is getting older now, he, many times in the past, you would see him in the kirtan at the LA Rath Yatra or in Mayapur or somewhere around the world, and he would be dancing the whole kirtan, spinning around. So he's very nice, wonderful devotee. So it's nice to have him here. I was a transcendental meditation teacher, and he was also a transcendental meditation teacher. And so even though there were some people think that was Mayavadi philosophy, but some of us took it as a Brahmavadi. There's a verse in the Bhagavad Gita that says that where Krishna tells Arjuna that many lives you and I have had, I can remember them all, but you cannot. So in the movement that we were in that purport, even though the person in that movement is sometimes thought of as a Mayavadi, he said that this is the difference between a conditioned soul and the Supreme Lord, that the Supreme Lord is like, his status is like the ocean, and the individual living entity is like a wave on the ocean. So he was saying basically the idea that Supreme Personality of Godhead is quantitatively greater than the individual soul. So he pointed out a difference between the living entity and the Supreme Lord. So some people became devotees of Krishna even though they had that involved in that practice, such as His Holiness Radhanath Maharaj, Holiness Indradumna Maharaj. Quite a few people became devotees of Krishna after doing that process. So sometimes we attack everyone that's not a devotee as a Mayavadi, but not everyone's a Mayavadi. So Prabhupada mentions that those who are actually Mayavadis, they may reach the Brahmajyoti, but because of their pure consciousness for want of shelter in the Vaikuntha Lokas, they fall back again to the material world. So, one other impurity, or avishuddha buddhaya, is for a Vaishnava is to not understand or not follow the teachings of the founder Acharya of the Vaishnava movement. So our intelligence, our buddhi must be, since we're members of the International Society of Krishna Consciousness, we have to follow the teachings of the founder Acharya, Srila Prabhupada. So we have other acharyas, Vaishnava acharyas, but senior devotees have pointed out that we understand the other Vaishnava acharyas through the lens of Srila Prabhupada's books and teachings. Not that we try to understand Prabhupada through our own study of various scriptures, but we understand the various scriptures through Prabhupada's translations and purports. Prabhupada sometimes said if you follow another acharya, even a Vaishnava acharya who, even if they're a devotee of Krishna, if they have some slight different understanding or explanation of our philosophy, will get confused and may lose faith. So it's very important to follow the teachings of the founder Acharya. Founder Acharya teaches the standard process and understanding, presents it. So if we don't follow the founder Acharya, that's another form of avishuddha buddhaya, another form of impure intelligence. So there's a lot of, it's a type of garbage. There's a thing called plastic, which it's not biodegradable. So it's very difficult to get rid of plastic. So somehow plastic ends up in the ocean. And there's a thing called the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. This is, there's so much plastic goes into the ocean, and then there's certain currents that bring the plastic. If you throw some plastic bottle in the ocean off Los Angeles, it'll eventually go near Japan. And it starts to dissolve, but the little pieces of plastic are in the water. So one sailor was sailing across the ocean, and he discovered this huge part of the ocean that had little pieces of plastic in it. It's described that it's twice the size of Texas, or 3 times the size of France. So it's a impurity in the sense that the plastic absorbs. It has some toxins in it, like the dyes and things, and it absorbs some other toxins. But then fish eat the plastic, and fish get more toxins in their flesh, and then people eat the fish. So there's so many types of impurity or uncleanliness. And I think Prabhupada explained that plastic is very hard to clean. It's like in India they use steel plates, or they use leaf plates that you eat on the leaf plate, then you can throw it away, so it doesn't get, it's clean in the beginning, then it's thrown away. They use clay cups. Shishivaradina Madhava Ki. Traditionally, they use clay cups, which at one time they use it and they throw it in a pile of clay cups, and then the clay it rains on the pile and the clay just turns into soil again. And the sun purifies the soil, and things grow, and it's biodegradable. But plastic is not biodegradable, and somehow it soaks up. Like we have a lot of oily prasadam, and then you put it in plastic. Plastic is very convenient, but it's not really the cleanest thing. So it's hard to clean the plastic. You have to use a lot of soap to get this oiliness off the plastic. The same thing with styrofoam. So sometimes many of our temples use styrofoam because it's cheap, but it's not the most it's not biodegradable. It's not the cleanest thing to use for the environment. So some temples use, it works. Plastic works really great. It holds out the liquid things. So sometimes you use biodegradable containers and they get soggy. So plastic is not considered so clean also. So what this verse, the last few verses are giving the instruction that if we want to get purified, if we want to get our hearts clean, we have to approach a spiritual master. Tadvidi pranipatina pariprasnena sevaya. And we have to perform austerities, tapa, as we're reading here. And in the commentators say the main austerity is one to remain fixed in executing his proper duty in life. So as devotees, the main austerity we have to do is to serve the spiritual master. And Srila Prabhupada is the spiritual master of all of Iskcon. He's the preeminent Shiksha Guru. So if we serve him and his mission, that's the greatest austerity. I mean, some yogis do more fasting than we do, or more, you go to the Kumbh Mela, some yogis they have long fingernails that haven't cut, they have weird, they sometimes sit on nails and things like that. So they do very strong physical austerities, but the translator here is saying the main austerity is to execute our proper duties in life. So if we can follow Prabhupada's instructions and serve the mission of Krishna consciousness, that's the greatest austerity. So, read on. According to Vishnu Purana 389, Varnashrama Charavata Purushena Parapuman Vishnu Aradyate Panta Nanyata Tosha Karanam. Every human being can achieve spiritual perfection by dedicating the fruits of his prescribed work to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Vishnu. Similarly, in Bhagavad Gita 1845, Lord Krishna clearly states, Sve Sve Karmani Abhirata Samsiddhim Labhate Naraha. One does not have to adopt a monastic life or live in the forest as a yogi. One can achieve perfection by dedicating his occupational duties to the Supreme Lord. Similarly, Bhaktivinoda Thakur has said, Namasraya kariyatane tumi takaha apane kaje. If one sincerely takes shelter of the holy names of Krishna by chanting, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, he will achieve spiritual perfection within the compass of his normal daily activities. Unfortunately, if a human being neglects the regulative principles of civilized life that prohibited illicit sex, meat eating, intoxication, and gambling, he will surely be overwhelmed by the waves of lust and anger, which completely cover one's consciousness of the reality of spiritual life and draw one to engage in the phantasmagoria of the temporary material body. As Lord Krishna has stated in Bhagavad Gita 3:39, Avritam jnana etena jnanino nityavairina kamarupena kondeya dushparena analena cha. Thus a man's pure consciousness is covered by his eternal enemy in the form of lust, which is never satisfied and which burns like fire. Therefore the word tapa, or austerity, in this verse indicates that one must remain in his prescribed duty and not become impatient or unregulated due to the waves of lust, anger, and greed. So the Gita also says that this lust is situated in the Indriyani Mano Buddhir, in our senses, mind, and intelligence. So by practicing Krishna consciousness, our senses see the form of Krishna, smell the aroma from the flowers and incense offered to Krishna, taste the pure prasadam. Our mind hears about Krishna and the philosophy of Krishna consciousness, and our intelligence becomes Shuddha Buddhi, purified intelligence. Would you like to read from the next paragraph? The word titiksham. You see where we are? Just after. Yeah. Yeah.
The word titiksham, or tolerance, indicates that a transcendentalist must be forgiving. The material world is full of embarrassing and irritating situations, and unless one is inclined to be very much forgiving, he will become infected by a vindictive mentality, which spoils one's spiritual consciousness. Maunam, or silence, means that one should not speak on worthless or frivolous topics, but should discuss...
Wait. So I wanted to say something on tolerance. in the book by Giriraj Maharaj, he was explaining it when he was the temple president in Mumbai, Bombay. You know, he has a very mild personality, but he was really given a heavy responsibility of being the temple president at a very difficult time when they were living in rat-infested, mosquito-infested, really horrible conditions. So some of the devotees were, like, devotees always have different ideas of how to manage the temple and do things. So some devotees were arguing and fighting, and one devotee spit on Giriraj Maharaj, physically spit on him. And Giriraj Maharaj forgave him, and, you know, he didn't curse him or kick him out of the temple. Or he just saw the good in him. And Giriraj Maharaj was the temple president, I believe, for 29 years. So, you know, you can imagine how much tolerance he had. He was his parents were millionaires. His parents offered him $1 million if he would come home and practice Krishna consciousness at home rather than in Bombay, living in sort of shacks on the temple property. So he was a very, you know, from a wealthy family, but he tolerated so much to serve Srila Prabhupada. So it's such an amazing example. And, you know, not that Iskcon is always perfect, but Prabhupada gave a phrase. He compared Iskcon to a country like England. And when someone is in a country, they have some loyalty to their own country. So Prabhupada quoted one British writer who said something like, "England, with all your faults, I still, you know, love you." So Prabhupada said, Iskcon, with all your faults, we should love Iskcon somehow. And some senior devotees have compared Iskcon to the Ganges River. So the Ganges River is always considered pure, but people dump a lot of garbage into the Ganges River. You know, like sometimes there's dead bodies floating on the Ganges, and people dump their trash in the Ganges. But the Ganges, because it emanates from the higher realms and touches the toe of the Lord and the head of Lord Shiva, it has a purifying effect. And even scientists have studied the Ganges water and found that, I mean, it may be contaminated, but the contaminations, they put the contaminations in different types of water, they'll grow much faster in other water. They don't grow in the Ganges water to the same degree. So Prabhupada gave this example. So you can keep reading from Monam.
Maunam, or silence, means that one should not speak on worthless or frivolous topics, but should discuss the actual issues of human life, such as going back home, back to Godhead. Remaining completely silent is a symptom of ignorance. A stone is silent due to a lack of consciousness. Since every material thing has its spiritual counterpart, the Vedic Shastras contain negative and positive injunctions. Corresponding to the negative injunction against speech is the positive injunction that one should always speak about Krishna. Satatam kirtayanto mam. One should always speak about the Supreme Personality of Godhead, glorifying His holy name, fame, pastimes, entourage, and so on. In the Srimad Bhagavatam also it is stated, Shrotavya kirtitavyascha dhyeya pujaschcha nityada. One should always hear about, glorify, meditate upon, and worship the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna. In the verse 21 of this chapter, it was stated, Shabde pare chanishnatam. The bona fide spiritual master is expert in Shabde pare, or the transcendental sound vibration describing the spiritual world. One cannot artificially remain empty-headed or speechless, as advocated by foolish proponents of concocted systems of meditation and yoga. But one should be so absorbed in the loving service of Krishna, and so lovingly attracted to praising Krishna, that one has not a single moment free to speak nonsense. That is the purport of the word maunam.
Can you read?
Swadhyayam means that one should study Vedic literature according to his individual ability and also teach others. In Bhagavad Gita, it is mentioned that a Brahmin should have the qualities of Gyan and Vigyan, scriptural knowledge and practical realized application of knowledge. Specifically, one should study those books which increase one's desire to serve the Supreme Personality of Godhead. His Divine Grace, Om Vishnupad Paramahamsa Parivrajacacharya Ashottara Shatta Sri Srimad Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada has written in a few short years a veritable library of transcendental knowledge. It is being practically seen throughout the world that when the principle of Swadhyayam, or Vedic study, is applied to these books, such as Srimad Bhagavatam, Bhagavad Gita as it is, Chaitanya Charitamrita, and the Nectar of Devotion, the sincere reader becomes infused with the ecstatic determination to serve the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The entire International Society for Krishna Consciousness is expanding all over the world on the basis of this transcendental literature. Swadhyayam does not indicate speculative or imaginary interpretations of religious scriptures, nor should one try to read many books to increase his false prestige as a so-called scholar. One should read those books which inspire practical spiritual advancement in knowledge and renunciation, as exemplified by the books of Srila Prabhupada.
Sri Prabhupada Ki. So, a lot of impersonalists do the moon of Rat, they don't speak. But devotees speak about Krishna, so that's the real Mona Bharat, to not speak of nonsense. And Prabhupada gave us Bhagavad Gita as it is, so as long as you're presenting the philosophy of Krishna consciousness as it is, then speaking is not a problem. But in the movement that Bhakta Avatar and I were in, one time the yogi that started that movement, he went into a silence for some time, maybe a week or something. And then when he came out of his silence, one of his disciples asked, what realization did you get? And he said, Krishna consciousness is the highest philosophy. That person said, can you tell me about Krishna? And he said, if you want to learn about Krishna, you should go to A.C. Bhakti. I don't think he said the whole name, but he said, go to Swami Prabhupada. And he had a picture of Krishna that he always, in his rooms. So, this person became a devotee, is mentioned in, he met Prabhupada in Atlanta, and Prabhupada talked to him and asked him questions and so forth about that. And the word Arjavam indicates simplicity or straightforwardness. According to Srila Sridhar Swami's Srachatam, or clarity, transparency, is a symptom for straightforwardness. Unless one is pure in consciousness, Shishiva Nirmadva Ki. Unless one is pure in consciousness, he will adopt many crooked means. straightforwardness does not indicate that one should insult others in the name of honesty, but that one should speak the humble truth. So Prabhupada gave a nice example of straightforwardness. He wanted us to speak the pleasing truth, but not the expense of truth, the absolute truth. So Prabhupada spoke strongly and attacked various philosophies that were bogus or deviant from the highest Siddhanta. But he also was pure-hearted, so he changed people's hearts, like Srila Prabhupada would sometimes criticize or argue with scientists or scholars, and afterwards they would say, even though he might have defeated them or opposed them vigorously, they would say, "What a nice man, I had a wonderful experience." So Prabhupada had a pure heart, so he could speak the absolute truth, and it would actually affect people. Prabhupada explained that so many versions of the Bhagavad Gita came out, but they didn't make devotees like his Bhagavad Gita as it is. So Prabhupada presented the philosophy straightforwardly in the Parampara. And sometimes in Iskcon's history there were times when devotees would say, here's this book, the money will go for Bangladesh or something like that. You give a donation, it will go for Bangladesh food relief. Whereas it might have gone, it actually went to the BBT to print more books. So sometimes devotees would not always be straightforward. And then at certain times in Iskcon's history, we would do some business, and we wouldn't tell them we were devotees, but we were saying we're helping this charity, and we weren't always straightforward. So I think that this quality of arjavam is very important. The word brahmacharyam, or celibacy, indicates either renouncing completely the association of women or following strictly the Vedic principles of householder life, which regulate sex life for the purpose of procreating saintly children. So this verse is saying how to follow a spiritual master. So brahmacharya is important for either an unmarried person or a married person. Prabhupada said a devotee that's following regulated family life is grihastha brahmachari. This is when the husband and wife have sex life only to beget children, Krishna conscious children, and with the blessings of the spiritual master and so forth. So, but Prabhupada was one of the only gurus in the 60s and 70s that made this a requirement. No meat eating, gambling, intoxication, or illicit sex. And other gurus, including the one I followed, didn't make this a requirement. So Prabhupada was straightforward in saying what is required to go back to God and to turn our backs on the material world. So Prabhupada was superior in this way to all the other gurus that came at that time. I mean, there was a guru in Pune that was very debauched and openly advocated illicit sex. So Prabhupada stood out for his standard of purity of regulative principles. Ahimsa indicates that one should not commit violence against any living entity unless one is aware of the subtle laws of karma by which a living being enjoys and suffers. One cannot actually practice ahimsa or non-violence. Ultimately, the material world is full of violence, and the laws of nature, which impose old age, disease, and death upon every living creature, are themselves filled with violence. Therefore, if somehow or other one can convince others to surrender to Krishna and thus release themselves from the violent laws of material nature, that is the perfection of ahimsa. So Prabhupada gave us a deeper understanding of ahimsa than just not like the Jains they practice one kind of ahimsa better than devotees of Krishna. Like they'll be very careful not to step on an ant, and things like that, right? But devotee they may not drive in a car, really strict Jain, may not drive in a car or something, right, because they don't want to kill bugs. And they may fast and live very austerely. They put something over their mouth so that, I don't know, somehow the flies won't fly into their mouth, which doesn't happen very often anyway. Doesn't seem like it, but so that they practice one type of superficial ahimsa better than devotees. But Prabhupada talked about getting out of the material world completely by Krishna consciousness. So Prabhupada taught that the most effective way to really not be violent to other creatures is to give them Krishna consciousness. As the devotees here are pointing out, the material world is ashashvatam dukkhalayam. It's full of impermanence and suffering. So unless we help someone get out of the material world, we're not really practicing ahimsa in the deepest sense. So sometimes we feel awkward, like trying to give someone a book sometimes. They have their false ego and they act like they're being bothered, and we might feel like we're impinging on their space, but devotee is actually trying to help someone come to real peaceful, nonviolent situation. So you want to read the last part?
Samatvam dvandva samgayo indicates that one should keep a cool head even when disturbing material dualities become manifest. Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, Matra sparshastu konteya shitoshna sukadukada agama payano nityas tams tatikshasva bharata. O son of Kunti, the non-permanent appearance of happiness and distress, and their disappearance in due course, are like the appearance and disappearance of winter and summer seasons. They arise from sense perception, O scion of Bharat, and one must learn to tolerate them without being disturbed.
Anybody have any comments or questions? Yes, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna. Thank you. I heard most of your class in my car. You mentioned Bhaktivinoda Thakur, and he wrote that song Agyat Tahal. I think it means patrolling on the Lord's order. The Nadiya Godrume, Nityananda Mahajan. So there he says, I think the last verse is Jiva Doya Krishna Nam Sarva Dharma Sar, which means the essence of, what does it mean? The showing of compassion to all living entities by loudly chanting the holy name of Krishna is the essence of all forms of religion. So that's the best way to show non-violence. Yeah, Haribol. Thank you. Hare Krishna.
Yeah. Real Jiva Doya is by friending the Nam Ruchi, the holy name, the pleasure of the holy name. Okay, I guess we can end here. Vantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam Ki, Gaur Bhaktivinoda Ki.